Hi, welcome to episode 134 of Grow Yourself Up. So this week, I'm delighted to be joined by my guest, Julianne Boutaleb, and we have a fabulous conversation, which I'll tell you a bit about after I've told you all about Julianne. So Julianne is the clinical director and founder of the Parenthood In Mind practice. Some of you may know her from Instagram. She's at Parenthood In Mind. She's a passionate and highly experienced perinatal psychologist who's worked for over 24 years in the NHS and private practice with parents and parents-to-be and their babies and bumps who've needed support with a wide variety of issues, including anxiety and depression during and after pregnancy, miscarriage and reproductive loss, attachment issues, re-emergence of childhood issues, and couples issues. Julianne is a member of the Birth Trauma Association, and she specializes in working therapeutically with birth trauma, PTSD, and tocophobia, which is a fear of giving birth, as they impact the mother, the couple relationship, and parent-infant attachment. In addition, she is also affiliated with BICA, which is the British Infertility Counselling Association, and offers tailored psychological interventions for individuals and couples, including same-sex couples who are pregnant or parenting following following ART, which is IVF, ICSI, donor conception, surrogacy, or adoption. She also specializes in offering psychological support to parents, either individually or together, who are co-parenting in the midst of separation and divorce. She has over 15 years experience teaching and training psychologists and health professionals on issues of parental mental health, attachment, early years, and positive mental health for babies and young children. Julianne works from a variety of perspectives, including psychodynamic and attachment models, CBT, integrative, ACT, and compassion-focused work, couples work, and can also offer parent-infant sessions using the Watch, Wait, and Wonder model, which focuses on how you can improve your attachment relationship with your baby. Julianne can offer sessions in either central London or South Woodford. And she also works over the phone, and she's registered with all the different professional bodies, and that will also all be in the show notes. So we focused on how your journey of parenting is altered when you've had a long fertility journey, and what that does to the longing for your baby and desire for your baby, and how you feel about the baby, and how you feel you're allowed to be as a parent after this long journey. And we focused a lot on a fertility journey. And I want to say that you may also really recognize a lot of this if you are an older parent, so an older mother, because a lot of what we talked about, I also felt a lot of this stuff, being someone who had their children when they were 40, and you may also have had your children when you were 40 or older. And when we've had a long time of longing for children, we've built up so many projections about how this is going to be, and how we are going to be as mothers, and how our children are going to be. And there's also so much that the baby holds in terms of what they're going to deliver for us. And Julianne's got a wealth of experience in this area, and so much beautiful wisdom. And she also reads her most beautiful poem towards the end. So wait to hear that poem, because that is profoundly moving. Okay, I'm really excited about this episode, so let's dive in. Welcome, everybody. Today, I'm really, really delighted to have Julianne Boutaleb with me. She's a perinatal psychologist, and I met her about 10 years ago at a training, and I was just remembering this morning, and she made a big impact on me because I was actually trying to get pregnant at the time. I had recently miscarried, and she was so kind, and I was worried about my own ability to fall pregnant and hold the baby because of my own autoimmune condition. And she was just so kind. And I went for lunch with her one day with some other people on the training. And yeah, I've got such warm feelings around that. And she's very dear. And so I'm just so honored that you're here, because I know how busy you are, and really delighted to have you. So thank you. So let me start. Yeah. Do you want to say hello or anything?
Yes, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And I know I've been playing hard to get a little bit. The last few years have been really, really tricky for me in terms of personal circumstances. It's been a very busy, thankfully, growth of the practice, Parenthood in Mind. But I'm delighted that we have finally made and kept this date to talk about the things that I know are very dear to our hearts. So thank you so much for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. Okay, now I wrote out some very so let's start. So I know that you, like me, came to motherhood late. And what impact do you think that had? Like, how do you think the deep longing and the desire for this baby that you really wanted, how do you think that impacted what you allowed yourself to experience in all arenas, emotional, somatic, all of that? Can you talk to that and tell us about your path to motherhood?
Absolutely. I mean, my path to motherhood was very circuitous, and that really rubbed up against a belief I had about becoming a mother that really didn't sit right with me. As Joan Raphael Leff, one of my really favourite sort of writers on motherhood, says, that there was this sense that I had to deal with the reality of being a mother very early on. In other words, I was the oldest of five, and in Irish culture, you were often given, mothering tasks to do. I was the clinical lead in a team of perinatal psychologists in the NHS. I was the friend that everybody went to. So, in many ways, in my mind, I was already a mother. It was just that I needed the baby to happen. But of course, what was most difficult was the baby materializing. And what I mean by that is that I had a very circuitous route through different fertility treatments, and I had my experience of losses. And if anything, that intensified the desire almost to, and I hope people understand when I say this, but almost to my right to motherhood, that this was something that was going to come to me. I was a professional expert in this area. And all I really needed, and again, I'm speaking deliberately in a facetious way, was the baby to turn up.
Yeah.
However, little did I know that not only was the baby not going to turn up easily, but that I was going to have to go through really a metamorphosis before I met my longed for baby, my gorgeous daughter, Sophia. Um, and that was really challenging. It was challenging professionally. I would often have clients outright, and of course they would ask, do you have kids yourself? Or, I mean, have you tried some of these tips yourself? And of course that was very challenging. It was very shaming, Cath, which
Very.
I found really difficult. And I think what happened, and what I'm really interested about when I work alongside those who have this very long, drawn out, circuitous route to finally meeting and holding their longed for baby, it's what it does to your motherhood, what it does to your matrescence. And I think what happens is my desire for this baby, my desire to prove that I would be a good enough mother, as soon as I would have the baby, became heightened and intensified. And alongside that, I wasn't allowed any ambivalence around that. And that's a really toxic mix. Because what that means is that I am in my mind and to others around me proving that I deserve this. I'm going to go through everything possible to have this baby, to carry this baby, to finally hold this baby. But as I often say to my clients, guess what? The baby is completely unaware. It's not as if they receive a script of some sort, at least consciously, that, please be kind to this mama. She's worked really hard to have you. No, the baby
Please
comes
be
into
gentle.
the world. Please be gentle with her.
Please don't cry too much.
Please don't cry too much. Please settle when she needs you to. Please allow her to, hook her into the nape of her neck in the way that she's dreamt of and fantasized and imagined, and just soothe. And guess what? Often because of the trauma that we're carrying in our bodies, and of course the trauma sometimes that our gorgeous babies come with, that isn't always what happens. And that can be so tender and so confronting to those of us who have carried these images, not just of our babies in mind, but of ourselves as mothers and parents in mind. Very, very difficult.
Yeah. And that thing what you said about that you were going to prove that you are going to be this kind of wonderful, really good mother, we really then perpetuate our own perfectionism and trying to hold up this like fantasy image for everyone to see and also for ourselves to see. And then the shame that comes when we can't hold that up. And I think sometimes almost like I realized I wanted to keep that out of my own awareness initially, that I couldn't hold that up. How did you kind of allow yourself ambivalence, actually?
I don't think I did for a very long time. I think there was the sense of, and again, I'm thinking about this in the context of all my friends having gone ahead of me and had their babies, my siblings already having had babies, and also this sense of being a professional. Often I used to have people saying to me, "Oh, when you have your baby, you're going to be so good at it. You're going to be such a natural mother." And I think what happens, and again, it's very conducive to shame, isn't it? Is that we often hide these difficult bits. We hide the fear that, is it because I'm ambivalent? Is it because I haven't worked hard enough? Is it because somehow the universe is telling me I shouldn't be a mom, that this isn't happening? And then in those early days when we're trying to sort of find our way with our babies, what we've done over the last few years, often to protect ourselves, Cath, is that we've often moved away from people actively parenting. So we're not privy to those conversations where they're saying, it sucks sometimes, or it's really difficult sometimes. So what we do is perfect feeding conditions for shame.
Yes.
We hide our doubts, we hide our ambivalence. We have no one really to necessarily talk about the parenting bit, because of course, anybody who we're really able to be around during these years of longing and wanting and desiring are also people who aren't often actively parenting and caregiving. So we're not having our fantasies hit the cold light of reality. We're also really nervous about having those conversations for fear that somebody, believes or, validates the fact that, yes, shamefully, sometimes we think we're not cut out to be parents. We shouldn't become parents. And then the other bit of this is um, the sense that we often move, and this is from the research, we're often in a state of pregnancy intendedness rather than parenting preparedness. In other words, our eyes are on the goal of becoming and staying pregnant, and the sorts of emotional and psychological defenses we use in order to sustain ourselves, or most bluntly, survive these struggles,
Mm.
often is about being dissociated, shutting down any ambivalent feelings, staying away from situations that might be painful or hurtful, or
Like
show.
no baby showers, no young hanging out with your friend with toddlers, and then your friend would casually say, "God, this is like the worst thing I ever did," and then you might think, "Oh, interesting," but none of that.
Precisely. And we call this emotional cushioning. And of course, it makes sense when you're on the journey, but it's
Yeah.
almost as if when we get to the destination, and again, destination of sorts, when we're finally handed our longed for baby, then it's, oh no, those tools that got me through the last 5, 6 years of yearning and wanting and desiring are suddenly no good. Now I have this baby in my arms, and I suddenly have to let go of that carapace of survival and move into this very confronting reality. So your fantasies are blown up overnight, really. And then who do you talk to? Because you've moved away from the people who have sustained you through your fertility journey. We're often covered in survivor's guilt because we know some of those are still on the journey. And where do we have the conversations with those who have perhaps not had the same experiences that we've had? So again, we're often in this no person's land, covered in shame, desperate to hide our shortcomings now in the reality of mothering our longed for child.
And I think that point about specifically in the fertility space where you've been with people so long, and maybe you've met them on social media, and maybe they're your friends in real life as well, who've supported you through losses, through different types of treatment. And then in some sense, there's almost, I would imagine, a level of, I would hate people. Actually, I felt a bit like that with my siblings, to be honest, anyway, because I was also the oldest and had the children last. And so then, of course, the people who are still desperately trying for a baby, you can't then go and say, "Are you sure you really want to do this?" Do you know what I mean? Because it's just never the two shall meet. It's like that, isn't it?
No, and that
Wow.
requires a fragmentation of ourselves. It requires a fragmentation of our mothering selves. The mother who longs for, desires, yearns, would do anything to have this baby is suddenly catapulted into the world of the mother that is really assaulted, thematically by her baby's crying. or, feels all at sea when she can't settle the baby. It's almost as if the bridging, it's almost a very traumatic entry into motherhood in
Very
a way
traumatic.
that I think often people don't feel able to talk about.
Yes. And tell us about, so this journey with fertility adds a huge layer of complexity. I'm just looking at some of the things I wrote to make sure I hit what I wanted to. And because we believe we need to be like so grateful for that desperate baby, what are some of the other things that you, feelings and thoughts and emotions that we could expect instead of, because like you said, you didn't let yourself have the ambivalence. What did you notice? Like, how did you even contain yourself? Or were you just kind of holding on really tight? What do you see clinically?
I think what I see clinically is the carapace that I've spoken about, that sort of masking often continue. And it's really interesting, the research on perinatal, so the incidence of perinatal issues for people who've gone through long fertility journeys is very mixed. For some, you would imagine, wouldn't you, if you're hypothesizing about this, if you've had a very long journey towards motherhood and all of the sorts of iatrogenic trauma that can come up when you're going through fertility treatment, or perhaps you've had multiple losses, perhaps you've also had a difficult birth, and it continues on into your motherhood.
You might have even had a stillbirth as well.
Absolutely. So one would suppose that the research evidence would show that, yes, we are more predisposed to anxiety, depression, and trauma. And yet, what is really interesting is that that isn't always the case in some of the studies. The general research body is very mixed. And I think that's to do with how much we mask.
Yes.
I think often because I know clinically when I see people, and again, you could argue I'm seeing a very particular self-selected, cohort who are
the people who've come. Yeah.
People have come. I think there are thousands who do not come, and often they come much later in their child's journey. It might be as they try to settle them in nursery and realize that the attachment relationship, has become very, very enmeshed and very, very difficult to navigate. Or it might be when they start school, or it might be indeed when they become pregnant again, and all of the feelings and thoughts and experience that they haven't dealt with gets suddenly re-emerges in this new relationship. So I would say I see a lot of masking. I see because if we look at the fertility research, what we know now is that most journeys last up to 7 years. So from the point of intentionally trying to conceive, and that,
which is incredibly long. I mean, I really want to honor that. That's hell. It's proper hell.
Yeah. And you're trying to hold down a job. You're trying to be loving in your relationship with your partner. You're trying to be present as a sister, as a friend. None of these things stop, and yet you're expected to carry on through. So what we know in the fertility literature is the longer the journey goes on and the more failed cycles of IVF-1 experiences, the more likely you are to then develop trauma, anxiety, and depression. And yet that does not carry through into the early parenting journeys. So we're trying to sort of match that trajectory through. And I'm involved in a research project in UCL with the brilliant Dr. Zeynep Gerten, looking at why these trajectories are so fragmented and why they don't sort of lead on to each other. And I think it's because of the ways in which we have to manage this turmoil across the journey to becoming a parent. And of course, it doesn't stop overnight.
No.
We continue in that vein often. And so often new parents say to me, I just don't feel that there's almost like sort of the desire isn't being met. I'm not enjoying this. I don't know if this is the baby I really long for. Who do you dare say that to?
Yeah.
Well, I think it was really a little boy I wanted, or I imagined a little baby who would sit in the nook of my arm, and now that he's crawling, that's really difficult to me because it throws me into a motherhood that I hadn't imagined for myself. And so often what we see, Cath, is this sense of being frozen. And I often say to people, of course, as part of the IVF and medically assisted reproduction, we often do freeze embryos. But I've written in a poem about this that it's often not just our embryos that are frozen,
Yeah.
us who stay frozen. And then suddenly...
Which we have to do to survive. I mean, that would be such a big...
Exactly. We have to. There's absolutely no argument with that. But it's what happens to us then when we want to be more loving, when we want to be more present, when we want to be more engaged in our early mothering days and find that we can't. And as I say, that induces great shame, and it's often very difficult to talk about with others.
And it's difficult to become then more embodied because we need safety, essentially, from a nervous system perspective. And then the shame makes us feel more danger signals and more stressed. And indeed, the noise of the child and all of the kind of jarring demands of parenting make it even worse. So then it's even more difficult to become like flexible and warm and loving and all of these things. And I'm really struck if we then overlay childhood trauma alongside reproductive and fertility trauma, that's even more of a kind of like explosion, I guess, as your entry to motherhood.
It is a real melting pot because, again, if we listen to the stories, the narratives of infertility, there are very clear themes that we do unfortunately carry into our motherhood around failing, not being like others, not being the person I imagined I was going to be. A very common phrase I hear is, this wasn't how it was supposed to be. And often what people are talking to me about then is a phrase many have heard me use, called a reproductive story. And it is a concept I've borrowed and hopefully been able to share with people in a helpful way from Janet Jaff and Martha Diamond, reproductive psychiatrists in the States. And they talk about the fact that the reproductive story is an unconscious story about ourselves that we carry from when we're very, very little. When we're playing, doctors and nurses are playing teddies and dollies and so on. And it's this unconscious belief that we will one day become parents. And of course, when we're suddenly hit with the reality that that's going to be much more difficult than we imagined, it is very difficult to hold on to beliefs about self, beliefs about how we move around in the world, beliefs about how we do things. Because again, if we sort of hold on to this idea of perfectionism, I know you and I have often talked about this, when you're a grafter or a perfectionist or the go-to person for advice, and you're faced with, I would say, that the mountain, the Kilimanjaro of infertility and infertility treatment, that really challenges your sense of yourself. Previously in life, you may have just worked really hard and always got the A star, or you may have always been able to come up with brilliant ideas as to how to get yourself out of whatever rut you found yourself in. Fertility is not like that.
No.
I think we really are often, for the first time in our lives, at that cusp of our limitations.
Yeah.
And so we carry that with us into our motherhood as well. It may be that we have triumphed, inverted commas, in finally getting pregnant and keeping the pregnancy this time. But of course, there are very few moments of triumph in early motherhood. It's the small wins, not the big wins. And so how do we restory that for ourselves so that we can understand there's something different happening now and we need to adjust?
And I think what you said about fertility is not like that. Like we cannot just, because I have been a terrible perfectionist and I'll just work harder, I'll try harder, I'll do something else, I'll research something else, I'll find the answers, I'll do this, I'll do this. And motherhood is also not like that. It confronts all your coping strategies in that way and they just fall down flat. And I love what you said about the reproductive story. And you also, we were going to talk about reproductive identity. So I guess your reproductive identity is something about, I'm just going to be fertile. That's just going to be how I'm going to roll. And how does that kind of, how did you see that shift clinically? How did your reproductive identity impact, how did that sort of change and how did that impact how you feel about yourself?
So this is the work of Aurelie Athan, who some of you may know from her sort of reinventing and repopularizing matrescence. And she's now gone on to develop this idea and has come up with the notion of reproductive identity. And this again is when the reproductive story, the fantasies about who we are, who we believe we're going to be, our preferred selves, if you like, we come into contact with the reality, with some limitations around that. And how then do we have to reconceive ourselves? Well, what she talks about is the sense that we're always constantly storying and restorying our identities, but sometimes we're forced to do so in very traumatic ways. And the other really invaluable bit that she brings to the table around becoming a mother after fertility treatment is this idea that matrescence starts before we actually have a babe in arms. And actually, what I love about it is that you can be a mother, and we know that our bodies already move into doing things on a somatic and neurobiological level, even if those pregnancies don't continue through. And so what I'd really like to add to this discussion, Cath, is the idea that our desire for motherhood intensifies in such cruel and unbelievably painful ways across a reproductive journey that we can almost be mothers and then have that snatched away from us through pregnancy loss or stillbirth. That we can be on the brink of, getting a positive pregnancy test and watching our HCG levels gradually rise, and even seeing our beautiful embryos on a screen before they're transferred. These really tangible, intangible,
so tangible, yeah.
And you're just able to touch it. I'm getting goosebumps as we're speaking, or as I'm speaking. It's that sense of almost motherhood, and then it's taken away again. And so that intensifies the desire, the grief. It intensifies what we bring to the table as mothers. And I think what's also really difficult about that is that sometimes we have to be helped to take back and mourn and grieve those fantasies about ourselves. Because if we're not careful, what we do is we project those onto our longed for children. So we sort of sometimes need them to know, and we can get quite frustrated. So this is the work of Ronald Fairbairn, who, again, is a wonderful psychoanalyst who I love. And he talks about the idea of, the baby looking for the object, in other words, looking for the mother, and the ways in which the baby brings the mother into relationship. And I think there's something about that we miss, that what does it feel for you to be brought into a relationship or not? What does it feel like for you if actually your baby is quite excluding of you and loving of your partner, perhaps, if you're partnered? Or
doesn't look at you, if you're gazing at your baby and your baby breaks eye contact a lot, that's devastating.
What's happening? What's happening in that mix? And so I would say it's really important that we understand this coming into a relationship after a very long fertility journey can be very fractious. It can be very difficult for both. And I think we do need help often, whether that's within a support group specific for mothers who are mothers after fertility or infertility, or with therapists or psychologists, like ourselves, to sort of try and take back some of those projections, because they can really trip us up and trip our babies up in terms of them coming into relationship with us just as they are. And I think that's often the frustration I hear vocalized when people come to see me in a quiet, hidden room, but they feel very ashamed to vocalize any of those feelings to others.
Yeah. And I think that goes often, what I noticed with myself is that projection of how our baby is going to be. There's so many projections when you've had, in addition to fertility, you've had the childhood trauma, because some people often have that projection of, this baby's really going to love me. Finally, I'm going to have someone who's going to love me.
Yep.
So there's that idea that the baby will meet your needs. And then there's that thing about my baby is going to be like a good baby. They're going to sleep well. They're going to eat well. And I don't know if there's much research on this, but I think that when you've had a fertility journey, your baby may not sleep that well. They might have had more stress in utero, so they might have had a much more sensitized nervous system, and so all of those complications will then impact how they actually are, like when they're here, like Earthside, and then. The perfectionism and control really reared their head in my early motherhood, where then you want to do more to try and control. And actually, you cannot control a newborn baby. You cannot people please a newborn baby. Do you know what I mean? And that's so
Yeah.
devastating. If you're doing that linkage of I need you to perform in a certain way so I can feel good about myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the work, the brilliant work of Dr. Sophie Brock, isn't it? She talks about that interlinking of the good baby with the good parent. That, if our babies are good, then somehow that's evidence that we are good. And I'm speaking tomorrow at the Birth Trauma Summit because, of course, my passion in recent years has been working with the traumatized baby. And
Yeah.
of course, we know, and again, I know it's often very disarming and often very difficult for people to think about babies in the ways that we need to really. But there's what happens when a baby has come through not just a difficult birth but a difficult pregnancy, or what happens if there's been a loss in utero. You've put back 2 embryos and perhaps there's been a loss of one. What happens when the pregnancy has been closely monitored because you're an older parent and there's been gestational difficulties such as gestational diabetes? What then happens to the baby if, again, we've had a very difficult birth and we feel even further estranged from them in terms of being able to come into relationship with them? And I think, again, it's this idea of having arrived at the destination of being finally pregnant and having a live baby in your arms. Of course, what we often need to peel people's fingers back from is that that's not the destination. This is a lifelong relationship, and you have to be tender with yourself. You have to forgive yourself over and over for all the things that you cannot be to this baby and cannot be because of all the very difficult things that you've come through. As we said, linked into the trajectory, perhaps, of childhood trauma. But I think the other thing I want to talk about here, Cath, is the ways in which, in psychoanalysis, we call it the dual identification. In other words, we sit with our longed for babies, not just wanting to be the mother, but it also is sitting in the evoked memory, somatic experiences and feelings of being a baby again. And they may be the things that perhaps we've defended against. But there is, of course, a helplessness, a hopelessness, a need to be held in these very long, arduous relationships that sometimes is recognized and answered, but more often than not is not. And so you sit there suddenly thawing, coming out of this freeze state, but then you're covered in shame because you're not able to contain. So it's always this dual identificatory trajectory of being the container. If I'm a good mother, I can contain, I can soothe, I can feed, and also wanting and needing to be contained. And maybe even more so because of the very difficult experiences that you have felt helpless and hopeless in across your, path to motherhood.
Yeah. And that thing about we may not know how to contain or soothe the baby. We may not know how to contain or soothe ourselves. And so that's where we really need, I think, a loving therapist teaching us how to contain and soothe ourselves, and then we can do that for the baby. And even, taking our baby with us to somewhere for observation and parent-infant.
Well, parent-infant work is often really important, and that's where I love the work I do, and that's sort of, again, the area of specialism that I love working in, where you need a patient, loving witness. Because often what happens is, if we've got too much in the way of projections and the ways we need or believe that we need to be or our baby needs to be, we're often missing what's actually happening. those little attempts at trying to get your attention, or the way in which you did distractedly soothe them but didn't notice it. And so often we work with video, we work with very much in the room. In fact, today I'm going down to see a mum and baby who are really struggling at the moment. And, you know, the holding that we often require in these early days of mothering is really important. We don't need people who are going to pick up on what's difficult. We don't need people who further add, you know, those that we've previously contained. We probably don't need them in the picture right now. We really do need loving, patient witnesses who can mother us and hold and contain us, so that we can do this, you know, sometimes really impossible task of mothering after infertility.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is so tender, because that thing where you just said, where the baby might desperately be trying to make eye contact with you, but you're like fussing that they haven't, I don't know, eaten enough milk, or they've just vomited again, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Because all those frustrations of the physical tasks, and then all that like thing about, is this good enough? Are they going to be you know, there's so much anxiety, I think, and particularly with childhood trauma, that dance of shame and anxiety, and control is the antidote to both of those, and so they both get frustrated.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's just a grapple for safety. You know, and I'm really keen on not pathologizing these things, because they do get pathologized, let's be honest. You know, but there's,
What, control, you mean, or what
yeah,
gets pathologized? Yeah,
well,
yeah,
the control, the grappling, the frustration, the, you know, I need you to do this. And as you say, in the sort of holding on to, I think that the safety of, okay, they've fed, they've slept. And of course, listen to the ways in which we talk about babies in society. Are they a good sleeper? Is he feeding well? We rarely say things like, how are you two getting along? You know,
yeah.
we rarely talk about the fact that this is a relationship that should be starting. And I think what can happen, as you say, it might feel safer and more socially validated to hold on to the safety rails of the feeding, the eating, the soothing, and then miss those moments of connection that are actually the magic. They're the that's what thaws you. That's what makes you, because often people say to me, I don't feel like a mom, because I'm in this sort of autopilot, often very dissociated mode of doing
Yes.
the baby rather than being with the baby. And again, it's like, please forgive yourself. That's just about you trying to feel safe. It's like little life rafts. At least if this has happened, then I can pause. And often what I try and work in to the schedule, if you like, is a sense of just sitting and meeting and being with the baby, gazing at each other, because they're often the things that are lost in these early days.
Exactly. And that, from I love Alan Shaw's work around that, it's the right brain to right brain, which we all need.
Yeah.
But that's the very essence of what we all have trained away from, because we're so left brain dominant in society. And so the actual magic, what you're talking about those moments of connection, that's what's actually wiring the baby's brain. I mean, yes, the safety of the feeding and the safety of safe house and being warm and having a nice place to sleep, but that relational connection is what we need. But we don't, like, I wish we did more education about that, because that's the bit where, if we overwork, if we tend to overgive, if we're perfectionists, that's the bit that seems to have no value. Do you know what I mean? Because what are you even doing if you're sitting and gazing? It feels like I should be, like, I don't know, sterilizing the bottles, or
But again, I think we've called it work for so long. You know, this is a relationship that you're coming into and arguably have been in your mind for a very, very long time. And now here it is. And of course, like any relationship, some people will say to me, but I just haven't fallen in love. I'm doing the thing, but I'm not feeling it. And I think it is, as you say, it's because you're hanging out in your left brain too much. It's about,
yeah,
and of course, that's understandable. At least you can see that the baby has slept. You can see, can't you, that the baby has eaten. But you can't see necessarily the benefits unbelievable, growth changes that happen in a baby's brain and in yours when you're sitting and gazing. We know now that as you say, Alvin Shore's work, that sort of right brain to right brain has benefits for you too.
Yeah.
But it does mean that you're probably going to have to leave the vacuuming till tomorrow, or you're going to have to forget, having to puree fruit to get the baby the best food. And I think that's what's often happened. We've commodified so many of the things that maybe perhaps provide, I would say, a fake sense of safety.
Yes.
And actually, we have dismissed or diminished, or, amongst that, the real jewel is allowing yourself come into relationship with your baby.
Yeah. And I think that I really want to, for the listeners, break down shame around this, because as a society, we are left brain. We are highly, highly focused on that. And a very common adaptation for childhood trauma, I have this, is flight to intellect. So I've parented myself from my mind. And so parenting in my mind thinks I need to do a certain set of things. And that idea of, there's a lot of terror actually in sitting and just being right brain to right brain, because there's terror because that wasn't done for us. And so then there's that thing about what is going to happen in this space often. So anyone listening, don't blame yourself.
No, and that's really important to say. And this will feel really difficult unless you're being contained too.
Yes.
So many of us are what Esther Bick, again, a wonderful psychoanalyst, calls precocious self-caretakers. That's what we are. And that's why we have these precocious left brains. We're often very articulate, and we're often very intelligent. We often look to all and sundry as if we're very self-sufficient. And again, coming back to this idea of dual identification, you suddenly have this baby who, as you say, I'm not interested in you people pleasing. I haven't got a neocortex yet. That isn't even going to impress me. What does your heartbeat feel like when it's next to mine? What does your breathing do when you pick me up? What's happening skeletally when you're holding me? These are the things I'm really interested in. So,
those are the things I'm picking up on.
And they're the things that we're really, as they're the things we're often very good at hiding when we're very left brain oriented. But of course, guess what? That's why it's so dysregulating to be with a baby. Not just that you're having to, tune in to their heartbeat, their, sense of physical safety, sleep, and so on, but they're tuning into us as well. And that can feel very challenging and shame-induced, that, somehow I'm being seen in a way. And I don't want to jump across this, because often parents will say to me, it's as if he can see through me. He's really looking at me going, oh, you really don't know what you're doing, do you? And that's a projection. Whoa, your horses. No, he's just interested in what happened when you turned away. And so it is a sense of, I would love all antenatal classes to teach parents about infant states, the different types of states they can get into, and also think about much more about the fact that our babies will dysregulate us. They're supposed to.
Yeah.
If we can sleep through a piercing cry, then in, anthropological terms,
they might die.
We would not survive, and they would not survive. So they are supposed to dysregulate us and disrupt us. They are the ultimate disruptors, babies. They come in and we have these lovely narratives and lovely ideas of who we're going to be, and they go, nah, that's not me. This is who I am. Can you turn up? Can you see me? Can you hear me? Can you feel me? Can you turn up to who I actually am?
Yes.
And of course, what I'm saying is, yes, I will try my best. And guess what? Babies know that. I will turn up over and over again and really try and learn who you are. I will put away my preoccupations. I will put away my fantasies and try and meet you where you are and who you are. But guess what? We don't have to do this all the time. It's not all the time.
What you said about, the dance of our attachment relationship is, we could consider it like dating a bit, that at the beginning you don't know the baby and you're getting to know the baby and you're getting to learn what they want. But again, as a perfectionist, process, the process around learning is itself very destabilizing. If you have always expected yourself to be able to hit the ground running, and in motherhood, you do not hit the ground running.
No, it's a different type of knowing as well, Cath. Maternal knowing and maternal thinking. And again, this is the work of North London-based Naomi Stadlin. She talks about, maternal thinking, maternal knowing being a mix of right brain and left brain, but more right brain dominated. And
Yeah.
it's knowing in a different way. What we may have been used to as perfectionists, it's knowing by rote. And often that's what we want as well. We want to have a formula. If I do this, this, and this, my baby will sleep. And of course, for a while, that's a wonderful life raft when you really feel at sea with all of these emotions and experiences and so on. And in a way, to use your analogy of dating, we'd probably go in, on a first date with a couple of formulaic questions, don't we? Where were you born? What do you do? How long have you lived here? So absolutely fine. But we need that to be flexible and move and bend and, morph into what our babies need. And that takes time. And I want to normalize that. And I think that's the most unsettling thing of all around parenthood per se and parenthood after infertility, that it keeps changing. No wonder have you found the life raft, the thing that works.
Yeah.
Then, damn it, the baby grows or has another growth spurt or moves or regresses or does something and suddenly you're all at sea again.
Yeah.
It's this experience of being able to have moments of meeting, of being able to thaw, of being able to come into relationship at times, not all the time, but to also forgive yourself for the times that you get it wrong. And this is the work of Ed Tronick over in America. He talked about the power of the third. And the third is the idea that this is, thousands of parent-baby dyads he has observed and researched. And he's found there is a rhythm of sorts that you can see, which is meeting the baby in their needs about a third of the time, a mismatch in the parent and baby meeting each other's needs for another third of the time. And then the other third of the time is watching the dyad trying to come back, or the triad, because I know you had twins. And often, after fertility treatment, we have multiples.
Multiples. Yeah.
Multiples, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we need to think about that too, that it's about understanding that your baby doesn't need you just sitting and gazing at them. Your baby also needs you to get up and sterilize the bottle or do whatever. It's a mix of things here. But that the moments of meeting right brain to right brain are building your baby's brain and
Yes.
doing wonders for yours as well.
And that when they're coming back together and they're repairing that rupture, that is actually good for them because that's widening their window of tolerance.
Yes.
So they are getting to be able to tolerate a tiny bit of stress within the holding the relationship, and that grows their resilience actually. But I think so many of us, again, going back to our own family of origin and kind of what was modeled there, rupture was either absolutely disastrous and catastrophic, or it was totally shoved under the carpet. And so the idea that we're having a rupture with our baby can be so decimating. It's sort of
because I think it's also the place where the fantasy gets ruptured, where those of us who have willed and yearned and prayed and hoped, we would be the best parents if only. Of course, that's the moment where it breaks down, and it can feel catastrophic. But it's about saying, okay, this is what's happening. Let's do something different. Let's take myself away for a moment, breathe, thinking again about the right brain, regulate myself, come back, or bring somebody else in who is regulated, a partner, your friend, a mom, a lovely night nurse, whoever it is.
Yeah.
Baby needs more than our autonomic nervous system. Babies need lots of different nervous systems to hold them and contain them.
Yeah. And that's okay, because I think that speaking to that help is really important. I'm just conscious of the time. I just want to ask you, we talked a bit about you were talking just now about parenting the child that we get. Is there anything else you want to say about how that can be experienced, and that when we have to really allow our child to become who they are and deal with the challenges of how we find that?
Yeah. I do want to read a poem before the end, so let's make some
Yes.
space, because I think it pulls together a lot of what we've been talking about.
Do you want to read the poem now before we do
It
this
might
question?
help, yeah, because it
Yeah.
pulls into some of the themes. Shall I
Yeah.
do it now?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is one of my poems called The Longed For Child. It will all be worth it, they said. And here you finally are, my dreams made real at last. But you are as ordinary and as special as all babies, I guess. No love at first sight for us. Relief, yes. But then a numbness where ecstasy should be, I think. Has it really all been worth it? The everyday, cracked nipples, sleep-encrusted eyelids, my valiant, confusing efforts to decipher your deeply encrypted cries. Has it really all been worth it? None of this reality ever found its way into my daydreams about you. Despite what others think, this baby-shaped hole cannot be filled by you. Despite what others say, the trauma is not so easily erased. Too many losses, too much waiting, too much anticipation. It feels like I've laboured for you all my life. Every syringe, every bruise, every scan, every cut. The clarion call of what I've borne to bury you, child. Inked on mottled skin. Childbearing of a most elongated and exquisite type. But now you're here, I have to tuck those scars away and join the tribe of the forever grateful, those for whom the bubble perhaps never bursts. My valiant efforts to love you, hidden now too, shame forces me to hide when I fall short. The journey to you, sometimes shared, not always understood, my longed for child. Sorry.
It's not need to apologize. It also made me cry when you said, like, it's the baby-shaped hole. Doesn't get filled by the baby.
No, it doesn't.
Because we have to fill that for ourselves, you know?
Yes, exactly.
And soothe our own inner baby who didn't get what they need, I think.
And I think that's the most difficult part of all, because of course that is the fantasy, that once the baby arrives, we are good enough, we are special enough to be mothers, thank goodness. But actually, those doubts never really go. You know, we have, that's not what the baby is there for. That's not the baby's job to do, as you said.
It's too much pressure for the poor little baby. They didn't get the script that they're supposed to be the final one. That they're going to be the one who really loves us now and helps us.
And think of anything that can be. It's sort of that sense of, I don't know if it's depression. It's sort of disillusionment in a way that, oh gosh, I finally have this thing, this experience, this relationship that I've longed for. And of course, what we have to do as parents is understand, as I said in the poem, that we're as ordinary and special as our babies.
Yeah.
We have to live with and tolerate the ordinary.
Yeah. And the ordinary in ourselves, and allow that to be enough.
Yeah.
And that thing about, I sometimes wonder if, sometimes about it, let me speak personally. I wonder if I've been given the matrescence journey that I've been given because I needed to be so broken down in some sense from many different things so that I could really learn to fill that hole with the things that I need instead of thinking my children will fill that. And yeah, it just does feel very tender.
I can relate to that. I think I have really been confronted in my mothering of my gorgeous daughter in ways that have felt, as you've said a couple of times this morning, decimating, debilitating, as if I would not survive them.
Yeah.
As if I would not survive. And I do think there's an annihilatory anxiety that comes with holding on to an identity for absolute dear life for years and saying, This will be the salve. This will be the thing that I will do right. I will be a different mother. I will take all that I know in my own case about mothers and babies and attachment, and I will put all of this into practice. I will break and solve and resolve my maternal, grandmaternal legacy, and this will be it. And the crushing sense that actually, no, that's not on you or your baby. That's not what the task at hand is about here.
Yeah.
It's about tolerating the sometimes annihilation
Yeah.
of yourself, at least your old self, the self that is intellectual and wise and mothers beautifully and, is a professional caregiving person. And it's about learning, gently learning that sometimes you have to let go of some of that in order to be the self, the maternal self that you're becoming. And to do that, we need to be lovingly held over and over and over again. And I really feel, Cath, we need to openly talk about what it's like to mother after infertility journeys.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing what you've shared here today. And we also need to talk about, I think, how important I believe therapy and support groups are in this journey. That especially if we don't have a loving mother to help us with that and do the containment, then this can be. I mean, I have earned secure attachment from one of my therapists. That's really helped me, and I think that there's no shame in that. And the decimating. There's something I wanted to say about the decimating. Oh, I can't remember what it was. Yeah, I can't remember. I had this good thought, but I think that like allowing ourselves to be broken down. That's been some of the hardest stuff. I think I've really resisted that. The wave has been crashing on me, and I've resisted that. I think that we've covered all the things that we wanted to say. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners with all this wisdom you've shared?
I think I would like anybody who is struggling with any of the themes or experiences that we've touched on this morning to know that you have to forgive yourself, that you have to be loving and tender towards yourself, that you do need to have people around you who get it. Aurelie Athan also recently wrote in the paper on reproductive identity that words create worlds. And I would say that is true. If we can't put words to these experiences, then we're all out there having these experiences completely on our own, crushed by the idea that we're the failures.
Yeah.
And that is not the case. This is a very, very common experience. I've seen it clinically. I've been through it myself. Cath, I think, has alluded to that as well. But I think the other thing I want to say is that there is a beauty sometimes in being broken.
Mm.
The mother that I now am to my daughter, wow, I couldn't even have imagined her.
Yeah.
She is a way better mother than the mother I thought I was going to be. And that's the other thing. There's something about that I couldn't have known.
Yeah.
And now I do. It's very, very precious. It's a very precious thing.
It is a very precious thing.
You need to be well held in the survival of it.
Yeah. I also feel like that. I feel like a warrior with a very soft heart. And I'm a warrior on behalf of my children. And I remembered what I wanted to say, and I think it's specifically about cycle shifting and cycle breaking, because that when we're trying to break cycles or shift cycles from our family of origin, it can feel so decimating to realize that we cannot shift all of them. And I think that speaks to what you just been saying about the annihilation is part of the fact that our children will have to do some of this work and it'll be ever ongoing. And that's okay. and being in relationship, even if it's imperfect, because many of us have come from families where there's no relationship, there's no talking, there's no working through rupture, there's no coming back together after tricky times and looking at what happened. And so being in relationship like that is life-changing for our children. So, and
But
that's
it's also
enough.
life-changing for us. And I think it can still ripple out and be life-changing for our relationships with our parents if we're lucky enough to still have them around.
Yeah.
And that is what I have found. I have found that is what's happened. I'm going to just read you another piece that I wrote around this, but it's something around regrets, that we never talk about that. If we're not allowed ambivalence, then we're never allowed to have regrets.
Yeah.
Because we're certain that we want to be mothers. So I just want to read this bit. I think it also...
And actually, I think regret is such an important thing to own up to.
Exactly. It's too late now. She's here. You're a mother now. Not just now and again or when you feel like it or up to it, but forever, always, today. No respite, no complaint, no room for regrets. But tenderness is the balm that allows those mother wounds to heal. Lean in, little one. Lean in and heal.
Oh.
And that little one is us.
Yeah.
And them.
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And I really love what you say about, I know your parents are still living, and about the healing that's come from that. That's really, really wonderful and touching. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today, Julianne. And tell us about how people can work with you. Tell us about your practice. And you do specific work, I know, in the fertility space, in various different organizations.
Yeah, so we're now, I think, 17 strong, Parenthood In Mind practice. We are registered and accredited parent-infant psychotherapists, family therapists, counselling and clinical psychologists, and perinatal psychotherapists. And we really pride ourselves on, as the tagline states, supporting you, whatever your path to parenthood, wherever you are in that path. So we work from the very moment of you attempting to conceive, or indeed having worries about becoming a parent, and then possibly having to go through assisted reproduction, all the way through till your child is age 5. We specialise in donor conception and surrogacy work as well, individual, couples, parent, infant and family work. You can reach out via, so you can see some of the things I've spoken to Cath about today on my Instagram account, Parenthood In Mind. If you are listening and you're looking for supervision and training, you can have a look at the LinkedIn account, Julianne Boutaleb, also Parenthood In Mind, or you can go direct to our website, which I'm sure the details of which
they'll all be in the show notes.
Will all be in the show notes.
Yeah.
You can just click on there and self-refer or have somebody else refer. We'd be really, really, really happy to hear from you.
Okay. Thank you so much. This has been really, really wonderful. Thank you for all. I didn't think I'd cry today, but thank you for all this beauty and your beautiful poems, really beautiful poems. Soon there'll be a poetry book of yours published. Thank you so much. Take really good care.